Do you wish you could do simulated process in your shop? If so, this is the video for you. Check it out. Hey folks, Matt from Printavo here at Sound and Fury to talk about how to set up and run a sim process job at your shop. We're going to talk about the variables, how to control them, and then we're going to jump onto press and actually do them and work our way through the process. So the first thing to know about sim process is understanding what it is. Sim process means simulated process, which is simulating what four-color process usually does. Four-color process, traditionally done with cyan, magenta, yellow, and black, overlays halftones to give the appearance of multiple colors. Sim process, or simulated process, is taking a design, parsing out whatever the dominant colors are, and using halftones of those to once again try to create a broader spectrum of color, even though we're only using those key colors of the design. To begin learning how to print sim process in your shop, I'd highly recommend working with a trusted art partner to give you good separations. Today we're going to use some art created and separated by our friends at Graphic Source. They've actually provided the art file that you can download below and follow along as we go. Once you know you've got a good art file, or at least you believe it's a good art file, you're going to want to go ahead and start imaging your screens. It's really important to always listen to your separator, who may actually call out screen mesh selection for the print. Otherwise, I usually recommend starting off around 230 mesh. That even works for on a manual press. If you're on an automatic press, you can usually get away with even going higher. Oftentimes 305s are used. When it comes to ink selection, it's very important to make sure you've got an ink that's going to have good opacity, but not too much body. I oftentimes will recommend that you use a little bit of a curable reducer to help drop the viscosity anywhere from 5 to 15%. When choosing your squeegee durometer, it's also important to make sure you've got a sharp edge. It's really vital to make sure that sharp edge perfectly skims along the artwork and drops down the stencil, holding the dots and not causing too much dot gain. It's also important to make sure your screens themselves have been checked for your EOM, or your emulsion over mesh percentage, because when dealing with a design mostly made of halftones, too much gain can vastly change the optical color that you're going to see on that print. Another key point that's very important to keep an eye on is making sure your palettes stay warm. Before you go into the run, send your palettes around. If you have an automatic, just set it to go around and warm them up. On a manual, spend a few minutes setting the palettes underneath and get them to a good temperature. Now, what temperature this should be kind of changes based on the ink you're going to use, if it's water-based, if it's plastisol. I find a good sweet spot being right around the 130 to 135 degrees at the surface of the palette. Oftentimes, you may hear people say things like wet on wet printing, or WOW printing, which stands for wet on wet. Traditionally, sim process is usually great for doing wet on wet printing. Now again, we're going to have our palettes warm, so we're going to say wet on wet. However, it's kind of a misnomer. It's a little bit of a partially dried, because the actual palette itself is bringing heat up into that ink. All right, so now that we've talked about some of the key variables, let's hop on press and test it out. Alright, so I've gone ahead and taken my screens to press and registered them. Now I'm ready for ink. So for the inks, I'm going to use the Pantone callouts that were called out in the art file. I took the inks and mixed them, but I did make sure to add, in this instance, 10% of a reducer in each of the inks. It's going to allow it to be a little bit more pliable and go through the screen a little bit easier. I'm on a manual press here, so going through 230 mesh can be a little bit hard to do, so thinning the inks down helps make sure it drops down, also helps with that overlay of different halftones. So now that I've got my inks situated, I also want to make sure to choose good squeegees. For this print, I'm going to be using triple durometers on all the screens. I'll start there. If I need to change to a harder or a softer squeegee, I can then go ahead and adjust it per color. So now that I've got my screens lined up, I'm going to go ahead and print my underbase and make sure that I'm getting the detail I want. Because I'm on a higher mesh count, I'm going to do a double pass just to make sure I'm properly clearing. One good way to tell is if the screen pops off and shears and allows that nice off contact, you'll know you're laying down the right deposit. Taking a look with this, it looks very bright for an underbase white. If you're not sure, you can have a plate of the set next to you to look at, or the film itself, to make sure you're holding the detail that you actually want to hold on the underbase. This looks great. I'm going to go ahead and flash this and get ready to print wet on wet with the other colors. All right, looks good. Ready to start doing the colors on top. I'm gonna go ahead and do my gray. Again, I'm on a manual with high mesh, so I'm going to do a double stroke for all. Flood. I'm gonna go straight to the next one, straight to the teal. Same thing. Double stroke. Make sure it's clearing. Flood. Looking good so far. Onto the red. Now, red I may only do once because it does a lot in one. I'm going to go ahead and do a second one without flooding just to make sure it clears everything. Looking good so far. Onto the black then to trap everything in. See how that looks with one. Looks great. I'm going to go ahead and flash this before I do my highlight white. So I want to make sure I flash before my highlight white because my highlight white is going to help really make sure that everything pops. The colors between did a little bit of blending. Doing wet on wet will actually cause it to pick up on the screen and actually blend and mix some colors from that. I don't want my top white to get too muddy or mucky and lose definition of what I really want to have pop. So I really do like to do a flash after my black and then go into my highlight white with a fresh, warm, clear surface. Looks great. Highlight white next. Start with one. See how it looks. Looks great. I don't think I need to do a second pass of white. Take a look at everything. Watch for registration. Looks great. The nice thing about sim process jobs, oftentimes it's going to have semi-loose registration. It really depends on what kind of art you're doing. If it's a photo, not so loose. Something like this, it actually is going to work pretty well, even if I'm not exactly dot over dot. That being said, always try to get your registration perfectly aligned. Looks perfect. Hopefully you learned a bit about printing simulated process in your shop with this video today. We'd love to hear any tips and tricks you may have by leaving them in the comments below. Be sure to like and subscribe for more videos like this. Thanks.